Welcome to the Bald and Bloviating Podcast. I am your bald and bloviating host, Mookie Spitz, and I would like to bloviate about our chief executive bloviator, Donald J. Trump. And I'd like to do so through the lens of a voter who voted against him back in 2015, again 4 years later, and again 4 years after that. And why I think my point of view might interest you is I want to be his apologist. And by this, I mean I want to extract everything that is potentially good about what he's doing. And I want to take this contrarian point of view, because I really believe that some of the things he's doing and intends to do are good. And B, I want to dispel the notion that we live in irreducible, intractable political polarization. And C, I want to explain how Trump's strategies are much more clear and well-defined and intentional than a lot of my own tribe thinks they are. And this is very, very important to understand where we're headed. And if you disagree with some of these strategies, it's absolutely vital that you understand their intent in order to thwart them effectively. So now that I've established where I'm coming from, here's where I'm getting to. Fareed Zakaria is one of my favorite pundits. Not surprisingly, he tends toward the center left. I find him very articulate and rational and very level-headed and clear in his analyses of politics, foreign policy, and global affairs. He does the GPS show. I believe it's on CNN. I listen to his podcast Sundays. And this Sunday, he epitomized what I think so many people get wrong about our bloviating president. Specifically, he described this pivot that we're all experiencing vis-a-vis American-Soviet relationships, or I should say Russian at this point. Everyone is freaking out or cheering this pivot that Trump has made in how we look at Russia. And as a result, how we treat Ukraine, the Europeans, our NATO relationship. Now, Fareed pointed out Trump's animosity and personal anger toward Zelensky as the underpinning and the foundational rationale for this pivot. This pivot from Russia being the boogeyman after the 2014 invasion of Crimea to Russia now being what looks like America's ally in opposition to the outrage that has already been expressed by Europe and the concerns of NATO, not to mention Ukraine. So, once again, Fareed has analyzed the situation and dismissed this pivot as personal animosity between Trump and Zelensky. To me, this epitomizes what's wrong with many of our understanding of Trump, many smart people's misunderstanding of Trump. I don't think that that's the primary motivation. I think it contributes to it, But I think Trump is far more strategic than that. I think Trump is often far, far more strategic than he's given credit for. Specifically regarding our relationship, our evolving relationship with Russia, Trump sees the global chessboard in terms of raw power and advantage, utterly devoid of any human value, any moral judgments, or historical precedent. In addition to that, Trump admires other leaders who take a similar tack toward their own self-interest, epitomized by their ability to be authoritarian rulers of their own country. So what I'm getting at here is, which scenario is ostensibly more advantageous to the United States? Scenario A, we support and pump up a proxy war with a nuclear power against the nuclear power, pump in tens of billions of dollars into a stalemate meat grinder, or we dispense with the pleasantries and embrace the erstwhile invader shamelessly and aggressively, rapidly, and devoid of any self-consciousness or doubt, to the greater end of creating a strategic alliance with Russia, which makes far more sense than being antagonistic to them. Now, what are the benefits of a U.S.-Russian rapprochement? There are many. On the surface, Russia is one gigantic gas station. They have the GDP of Italy. So why would you throw Ukraine under the bus, alienate all of the Europeans, and freak out NATO for a gas station with the GDP of Italy? And the answer is Russia is far, far more than that. Not only are they the number one stockpiler of nuclear weapons, but they have a strategic position as either a hedge or a frenemy vis-a-vis China and India and all the other major players across the planet. At the same time and in parallel, air quote, alienating the Europeans and freaking out NATO does not necessarily put the United States at any actual strategic disadvantage. Now, once again, I'm a Democrat. I don't want Trump in power, but I am understanding, I believe his point of view, and I'm articulating it. And just to summarize, I think Trump is strategic. He is playing a zero-sum game globally by renormalizing relations with Russia deliberately to strengthen the position of the United States. Now, this might be at the expense not only of the EU, but of the satellite countries, as it were, bordering Russia that are vulnerable. But Trump doesn't care. Go ahead and take Moldova. Roll into Latvia and put pressure on the Poles. Go for it. Are you going to reinvade Ukraine in 2 years? go for it. The bigger fish to fry here are natural resources, global power, leverage with and against the Chinese, and ultimately fist-pumping Vlad, who embodies the kind of rule that Trump himself admires. And that's evident in his redefinition of executive authority. Conservatives say along the line of the unitary executive in the Constitution, while other constitutionalists are freaking out because isn't Congress supposed to be the predominant body of the three branches? The ones who create the laws that the executive merely needs to enforce? But that's not the debate here. What I'm doing is trying to understand what the hell Trump is actually doing. And I'm not agreeing with this strategy. I'm merely articulating that it's a strategy. And it's not an ad hoc strategy, but it is a strategy that makes some sense. Again, if you divorce the morality of it, the ethics, the sense of Western values that countries shouldn't invade other countries, if you do adopt this zero-sum, top-down, winner-take-all, we care only about the big guys and screw everyone else attitude, then it makes sense. And here's the next question. Is the world safer or more dangerous with this pivot? Now, I think the world, at least on the surface, is safer if we're not in an active proxy war with a major nuclear power. But you could push back on that and say that once you destroy this tacitly assumed doctrine that big countries can't swallow smaller countries, and you let it slide, you even embrace it as long as the two bigger countries are on good terms with each other, then you open the door to the Pac-Manning gobbling up of a host of other countries. Namely, Taiwan comes to mind. What's to preclude Xi from China from wetting his own chops, seeing that this apparently is Trump's attitude toward these smaller states and countries? That, in and of itself, is very dangerous. But it's only dangerous insofar as you have any concern for those smaller countries. If you have your eye constantly on the prize of maximizing your own strength and potential economic prosperity, then the only ones who count are the big guys at the table. And once again, screw everybody else. And that, I believe, is his attitude. So I'm trying to push back on Fareed, my favorite pundit, who, like Trump, seems to have personalized this strategy. I think you got to get beyond that. I think you got to see the bigger picture of America first, American dominance, and American dominance not through the triggering of pointless, destructive, expensive, and bloody wars. Let's name a few of them. Vietnam, completely futile. Some say Vietnam was there to show the Chinese and the Russians that we mean business. Really? All of that money and death only to lose at the end? That's net positive. The Korean conflict, We did manage to save South Korea, eminently worth it, but that country has been in stalemate for half a century. No resolution. South Korea is free, but North Korea persists and is now nuked up. How about the second Iraq war? The region is less stable. Iran is more powerful. The horrific civil war that ensued. And what about Afghanistan, where after what, $1 trillion and all the death and destruction, the Taliban are back in control, more powerful than ever, the situation worse than if we never would have set foot on Afghan soil. So you see this long list of post-World War II American foreign policy, truly one disaster after another. America not stronger, but weaker. So the new approach to muscling the world, the new approach to dominion over the planet, isn't to invade, to bomb the hell out of people, only to fail and withdraw in defeat, but is what? To tariff the hell out of these countries, to trigger manufacturing at home, to send the message that we have economic control, regardless of internal consequence, at least for the time being, and you side with the big powers. Why support Ukraine? It's morally just. It sets the right kind of precedent for a world that is ostensibly more at peace. But if you take value off the table, if you take human rights off the table, and you look at it entirely as a relationship of power, convenience, and economic benefit, the Europeans aren't going anywhere. We're going to tariff their cheese anyway. NATO, what's the point? Who is the enemy if your enemy is now your friend? All the tens, hundreds of billions of dollars to protect Europe from Russia. America is now fist pumping Russia. And if Russia invades, then we can play both sides because the power players know how to play both sides. Think Saudi Arabia. And with that mention of the Middle East, show unequivocal, unilateral, and unconditional support to Israel. Screw the Palestinians. Plow Gaza under and turn it into a bunch of resort casinos. Annex the West Bank. Mike Huckabee has already articulated that, Trump's ambassador. The real enemy here is Iran. The real allies are the people with the real power in the region. Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, they've already established a security deal. Decades of presidents, Republicans and Democrats, have failed in the Middle East because they tried to appease everybody and ended up pissing off everybody. By coming right out and choosing the power in a zero-sum approach, that security deal was fostered. Common enemies, Iran, an understanding, either implicit or explicit, that people with no power, namely the Palestinians, shouldn't be given a seat at the table or even considered. Now, you can also say that this precipitated October 7th. because Sinwar, the strategist of Hamas, attacked Israel with the intent of triggering a 1000x retaliation, which is exactly what happened, with tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians killed, TikTok feeds exploding with horrible dismembered children, crushed bodies, women in agony. Sympathy toward the Palestinians exploded across the planet. Palestinians were front page news again, and the Israeli-Saudi security deal was put on hold. Mission accomplished until, here we go full circle, Donald Trump back in the White House, turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, exile the Palestinians. We don't need them. Annex the West Bank. And turn all eyes on Iran, neutralize their nuclear program, neuter them best we can, and fist pump with Saudi Arabia. Be honest, follow the power, do not compromise. You're with the big guys, you're the big kid on the block, you don't mess around with the small potatoes. Do you see the pattern here? It's consistent. It's logical. It's literally America first. Now, I'm not advocating this position. I started this little rant with the perspective that I voted against Trump. Would President Bald Mookie be doing these moves? I don't think so. But I can see why Trump is doing it. And it makes sense through this lens of dominion. And he wants to dominate. Panama Canal, he will make a move. Greenland, Denmark has had Greenland for 800 years. It's Greenland because the Vikings called it Greenland. So people would go there and not go to Iceland, which is a balmy, warm, and green tip of a volcano with thermal springs and a lovely place to live. So screw off. Go to Greenland. It's green. Avoid Iceland. It's icy. They knew how to market. But that said, Greenland is vast and it is loaded with natural resources. And it's strategically positioned in between the United States and our new friend, the Russians. Our new frenemy, the Russians. So stop playing Mr. Nice Guy. You have a big swinging dick. Swing it. And don't hesitate to fuck your friends. Because the name of this global game, there aren't any friends. Everyone is competing with you. And that is the attitude. Now, look at what Trump is doing with his promises inside this country as well. It's the exact same attitude toward undocumented immigrants and the border and the federal bureaucracy. Now, let's take a quick look at each of these. The border was a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. You can't have a country without a border. Well, that sounds like a cliche, but it's true. 10 million undocumented people entering the country during one presidential administration. And why? Because Biden tried to be the anti-Trump. Once again, values, humanism. We are the nation that welcomes. Bring us your poor, you're tired. No, get the hell out. Stay out. America first for Americans. And there's a racial component here. There's no doubt about it. But there's also a security component and a nationalistic component and an economic component. Now, I've been ranting opposed to mass deportations. I think the whole idea is stupid. But as a deterrent, it could be effective. This idea that if you declare mass deportations, many illegals will self-deport. There's an element of truth to that. There's also rhetoric to stir the base. But it's the same attitude that I've been describing vis-a-vis Ukraine, vis-a-vis the Palestinians, vis-a-vis the undocumented. Screw the little guy. We are the power. Why should we make any compromises which usually end up biting us in the ass? Look at Germany. Angela Merkel. Millions of refugees from Syria, other countries. Who came to power just this week in Germany? The Conservative Party and the AfD, the ultra right wing, some would say pseudo Nazi party, 153 seats in the Bundestag. The first time since World War II, no doubt as a direct consequence of problems with immigration. The road to hell is paved with humanistic intentions. That's the attitude. So screw the Palestinians, screw Ukraine, screw the undocumented. Is it cruel? Who cares? This is not a value-based judgment. It is America first. And then look at the routing of the federal bureaucracy. I posted a video on TikTok wondering about the MAGA maniacs with the flag on the lawn and the hat and raging on social media. What happens when they get shit canned? When their daughter, who works for the FDA or some governmental organization, gets shit canned? Are they going to roll down the flag? Are they taking one for the team? Well, there aren't too many of these, are they? And they're bureaucrats anyway. It's all about cutting. It's all about eliminating positions and saving money so that we could shuffle that money to the top dogs, the people who are in power. How do you give tax breaks, trillions of dollars of tax breaks? Largely to the base who elected you, middle class, but by percentage, mostly to the wealthy. Once again, it's winner take all. Top dogs bark the loudest and screw the little guy. And we can do it by chop, 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 bulldozing and chainsawing the government. Now, Musk himself had a valid point. And this goes to the valid point that I am attributing to Trump about maximizing American power, not through military force, but through political and economic force. When Musk announced in the Oval Office with his 4-year-old insulting Trump and crawling all over the place, Musk said that the deficit now, the interest payment on the U.S. deficit, is equivalent to the defense budget, and that is factually correct. The United States owes over $30,000 billion. That's $30,000 billion in debt, with interest of at least $800 to $900 billion a year, almost cracking $1 trillion. can't afford it. It is an existential problem. It's a can that gets kicked down the road from administration to administration, from Democrat to Republican to Democrat. We need to address that. And we need to address that while we make the rich richer. We need to address that while we tariff the shit out of everybody else. We need to address that while we retake the Panama Canal and claim Greenland. We need to address that as Ukraine is screwed, the Palestinians are exiled, and Taiwan gets reabsorbed into China. Fuck you if you can't take a joke. The joke, ha ha ha, is America first. And it's funny to us because it's a line we like to hear, and it's one that's long overdue. Manifest Destiny, Teddy Roosevelt, USA all the way. Now, once again, I'm not gloating. I'm an emigre. My parents were an emigre. I'm a first-generation American. I know what authoritarianism is like based on my father's direct experience as surviving the Holocaust. It's something that I got programmed into, seeing the result of that tyranny, cross-generational trauma, all of our relatives, direct connection to an authoritarian, shitty state. Is that where we're headed? In ways. FBI, DOJ, instruments of retribution, control of the FTC and media, the complete impotence, voluntary impotence of Congress. Everyone sees where this is going. The question is, to what extent? I'm not saying it's right, but this is a backlash to the backlash of policies that have resulted in America not doing badly. Look at our GDP. Look at what we excel in. But by any stretch of the imagination, is America what it hoped to be on the world stage? Is America what our parents thought it would be for us? Look at our healthcare system. Look at our food. Look at our government and its bureaucracy. Look at our foreign policy. Look at our influence in the world. Look at the arduous lives that most Americans still have to lead. 50, 60% still live paycheck to paycheck. Never have we had this much income disparity and inequality. And Trump and his minions tapped into that. And the Democrats completely dropped the ball by being all academic, professorial, and philosophical about the meaning of gender, sexuality, identity. So this is a two-way street. Look at Germany again. Very liberal, very progressive policies. 6 weeks, 8 weeks of vacation time in Germany. The Volkswagen factories are unplugged. Volkswagen had to close shop in Germany. They're upset. Americans are upset. RFK Jr., radical conspiracy theorist, nut job. Thing is, though, that half the stuff coming out of his crazy mouth have a tremendous amount of validity. He's right. Our food system is a disaster. Americans are obese and suffering from more chronic and progressively worsening diseases than ever before. What the hell is going on? Now, the average American eats better than a pharaoh. Alexander the Great would have had a heart attack or an erection walking through a Costco. Our quality of life in historic terms is unbelievable. And as the Harvard scientist, Steven Pinker has written, statistically, overall, the entire human race is living better, is healthier, is better educated than ever in our entire history. But we as Americans are fat and spoiled, and on social media, the tiniest gripe virally disseminates into an existential Civil War inducing cataclysm. So, in summary, when you put a bow on this epic clusterfuck that we're in, the entire Trump MAGA America First doctrine and its strategy makes sense. It's not ad hoc. It's not crazy time. It's designed to do two things, to summarize here. It's designed to do what it set out to do, make America great again, or at least America first. The good old days. And it's not the good old days for everyone, it's the good old days for the rich and entitled. And it's the good old days when America was at least perceived as that shining city on the hill, the power in the world. That's number one. And the other aspect of the Trump MAGA doctrine is bread and circus, which is the old Roman term for keeping the population, the herd, the audience of the Colosseum fed and entertained. You promise a better quality of life, and you do it in a way that's entertaining, very much like the Roman Colosseum. It's vicious with winners and losers, and every day, every headline, every nanosecond of our existence, there will be blood. And then we get that blood with the undocumented, round them up, federal workers, fire them. The Ukrainians, screw them. The Palestinians, exile them. The Taiwanese, tough shit them. The list goes on of losers, and there's a very, very short list of winners. And that short list is at the very top, the U.S. of fucking A. And that, to me, as a voting Democrat, that to me is someone who didn't ask for this and doesn't want this, at the very least, is crystal clear. We do have a border problem. We do have a health problem, a food problem, an education problem, a debt problem, and a foreign policy problem. It's all messed up. And here's the wrecking ball, offering the bread and circus with the big promise of America first. Booyah. And he's not the only one. Now, if there's any recourse, if there's any sense that we could retain some equilibrium between extremes, between Biden to Trump, between Trump and Obama, left and right and right and left. We swing from one extreme to the other. I think the correcting mechanism will be the impact of this extremist attitude in the real world. If we extend the power of the executive to the point that it steamrolls the other branches of government, there will be its own blood in the form of access, in the form of too much concentrated power. And heads will roll and people will rebel. Fire too many people, mistreat too many people, deport too many people, and there will be an impact on the economy. Sidle up with dictators. There will be wars. Trump is seen as an anti-war president, but I see writing on the wall in terms of us being roped into attacking Iran. The tariffs are meant to bring manufacturing back with as little damage as possible. It'll bring some back. It'll have some positive effect, but the economy is set to go into a tailspin. And who's going to do the work of all those people who will be deported? Construction, farming, price of goods. So the devil is in the details, and Satan himself is lurking in the numbers if all this plays out in, once again, an extreme, relentless, polarizing way. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. Who knows? Maybe the economy will flourish. We'll all be better off. We'll look back at these years as a time of revolutionary, disruptive, somewhat difficult, but eminently beneficial change. Maybe. I think it's going to be a caramelized marble, mixed up, mashed up stew of awesome change that'll really help the country and help the world, mixed up with some truly cataclysmic disasters. But what do I know? I am the Democrat who voted against Trump. I'm the ideological libertarian who thinks less government in principle is better, less regulation. So maybe that's the part of me that really understands and can wrap his head around what Trump is doing, because I see some of the benefit, at least in principle, and I understand the precedent and the tortured history that has led up to this moment. And all I can say sitting here is, and I say it when I rant on TikTok, and I say it on my blogs, bring it on. We really don't have much of a choice. The only real resistance to this will be the midterm elections. And even more importantly than the vote we cast in the booth, it'll be the vote that we cast with every dollar we spend or don't spend in an economy which is far, far more frail than what these disruptors assume it can or will be. So with that, I don't know if I clarified anything. I think Trump supporters who listen to this spiel are just even more excited about the changes that are being made, and Trump detractors probably dismiss all of this as the bald guy just bloviating, because really, like my boy Fareed, it's hard to separate the emotion from the thinking and the planning and excitement from the doing. But the one thing that we all need to admit is that the proof will be in the pudding. How will America's economy be in 4 years? How will America's standing throughout the world be in the next 4 years? And as I've been saying, it's going to be a mixed up, mash up mess of very good and very, very bad. So let's give it a roll. Vote with our conscience, but also vote with our pocketbook. So let me know what you think. Thanks for listening, and I'll be bloviating some more very soon.